You may be seated. A leper came to Jesus one day and said these words, "If you will, you can make me clean." And Jesus said, "I will. Be clean." Elsewhere, Jesus says to his disciples, "You are already made clean by means of the word which I have spoken to you." We are cleansed, my brothers and sisters, by the very word of Jesus as it comes forth from his lips. It is the word of Jesus that bestows life within our hearts. It's the word of Jesus that cleanses us from all that would destroy and undo in our lives. It is Jesus and his word that is able to raise the dead and to raise us up from death and to bring us into life. Today's gospel is about this word that Jesus is able to speak and continues to speak to all of humanity, not merely to those who had the privilege of seeing him in the days of his flesh, those who were witnesses of his remarkable and astonishing life, but it is a word that echoes down through the centuries, and it's a word that is spoken to me and you in this day. It is his will. Be clean. The religion of Jesus is a religion of inclusivity. I've said this before, but like most religions of the ancient past and even most religions today, we hear not an invitation to inclusivity, but we are called or told or reminded that most religions of the world are religions of exclusivity. Not everyone is welcome into every temple or church or any kind of religious community. But Jesus illustrates a radical concept that is still for us as moderns difficult to grasp, as it certainly was for the people of his own time. Jesus came into the world proclaiming the kingdom. But when he was proclaiming the kingdom, he was not merely talking about pie in the sky when we die. You've heard that expression. He was talking about a present reality that is available to us in this very moment, in this very place in which we live and in the circumstances of our lives. The kingdom of God, the reign or rule of God, is a present reality, an ever-present reality, and Jesus is the one who reveals that rule of God in our lives. And so when we come to him, we hear the message of liberation, of freedom, and of healing. For that is what the message of the kingdom or the rule of God is all about. Jesus not only spoke about the kingdom, but he also demonstrated the power of the rule of God in the very miracles he performed. That's the point of the miracle stories. It is to illustrate for us that there has been introduced into human experience another level of reality, a supernatural reality, a reality that is expressed in many ways, but most especially has been clearly expressed to us by God in the person of Jesus of Nazareth. That is what he's come to do. And the kingdom and the message of the kingdom is for all people everywhere. It's not for the select few. It's not for a religious elite. It's certainly not something that is guaranteed to those who are caught up in the world of institutional religion. The religion of Jesus transcends the religion of men. It takes up into itself all of the human aspirations and dreams and hopes. Everything we yearn and long for is taken up into this new way of being that Jesus is proclaiming, that we enter into when we encounter him as the very Son of God. This is the gospel we preach. This is the message that we proclaim. This is what has been given to us. We are the church. We are to bear witness to this message, but how often we fall so very short. was walking down the road one day in this gospel story, as Mark relates the story. A leper comes and is calling out, "Unclean, unclean," and encounters Jesus, and then Jesus has this interaction with him. I want to take a moment of your time this morning to think about this man who was a leper and what it meant to him in his life and his standing within the community. Leprosy is a dreaded disease. I remember hearing stories in my own family back in the 1920s. My family was struck with a disease that was epidemic at that time, an incurable disease called tuberculosis. And as a result, my grandmother and her mother and her younger brother ended up being put into a sanitarium to prevent the spread of that disease. Their house was put under quarantine, and they were put into a sanitarium because that's all they could do, is put them in a sanitarium, and there was really no way to cure this incurable disease. You just hope through the treatments and the care that you got in the sanitarium that you might recover. My grandmother's mother died at the age of 43 in a sanitarium. And her brother, who was the age of 21, also succumbed to the disease. My grandmother managed to survive. But that tragic event that happened in her life was something that would be felt for the next several generations, so much so that I'm able to tell you this story. Fortunately, modern medicine has made the idea of putting people under quarantine and sending people away to live in sanitariums is something more or less of the past. It may come back again, I don't know. But the people of ancient Israel would do this with certain people who had certain kinds of diseases. And one disease that was incurable, and everyone's nightmare, was a disease called leprosy, which has pretty much been eradicated in modern society. But it still abounds in places like India and Africa, places that we call the Third World. And leprosy in the ancient world was called that dreaded skin disease. And it would begin with a kind of numbing feeling in the outward extremities of the body, like the ends of the fingers. So it begins rather innocently. It's really not a disease so much of the skin as leprosy is a disease of the nervous system. Now, the nervous system is a two-edged sword for us. Because without it, well, you know, we wouldn't be functioning very well. But the ability of the nervous system to alert us to danger by sending us signals that we find very painful to the brain. We do not like pain. And yet, without pain, we might find ourselves in a great deal of trouble. It is the body's warning system. Something is wrong. Take your hand out of the fire, you know, before it burns to a crisp and it's useless to you. Leprosy, believe it or not, is a rather painless disease physically because it's deadening and killing the nerve endings. What usually happens is when someone has leprosy is they do precisely what I just illustrated for you. They would cut themselves, maybe preparing food, or burn themselves in the fire, and they would not realize they injured themselves. And then infection would set in, and gangrene would set in, and quite often, as the disease begins to progress, people begin to lose their fingers and their hands. It even spreads to the face, and so it becomes a very disfiguring disease. You feel as though, I would imagine, like a walking nightmare, a monstrosity. And that in itself is bad enough. But what makes it even worse is that it breaks up families. It splits marriages. It takes people who are children away from their parents and parents away from their children. It is the most destructive form of family disruption and destruction to family life that could be found in the ancient world, because you were virtually sent into exile. You were excluded from the community. It's the ultimate marginalization. And not only that, but there was a religious stigma attached to having leprosy. Because if you have leprosy, there was no understanding of the science of medicine at that time as we understand. And so people would see disease quite often as a curse that God would put on you because you've done something wrong. So the attitude of the community was, if you have leprosy, it's your own fault. You crossed God in the wrong way, and He's inflicted you with this punishment that you deserve. And so not only was this disease something that was a fearful thing because it was a contagious disease, and people were certainly afraid of it, but it also was something that ostracized you from the religious community. You were considered unclean. They didn't say you were sick. They didn't say you were diseased or you were ill. They would say you are unclean. And that expression unclean has religious connotations. It means you are impure. You are not welcomed in the presence of God. You are forever excluded from the people of God and from the things of God. You can't go to temple, you can't go to synagogue, and you can't go to church. It's a horrendous type of thing that could befall someone who has this disease. In fact, someone with leprosy was required to dress in a certain way so that they would always be recognizable in public. They had to tear their clothes. They had to be arrayed in literal rags. They had to cover their face. And when they're walking down a road, they always had to walk on the other side and call out, "Unclean! Stay away from me, I'm unclean." Why? Because in that day, it was believed, according to the religious rules that governed and regulated the life of the people of Israel, if you touch somebody who is ritually unclean and impure, then you have rendered yourself unclean and impure. Let me give you an example of this. It was considered a defilement for a priest to touch a dead body in the biblical times, in the time of Jesus. Did you know that? If a priest would touch a dead body or a corpse, the corpse is regarded as unclean. Then he renders himself unclean, and for a period of time he had to go through purification rites, and during that time he couldn't go in the temple and couldn't offer sacrifices. This is one of the reasons in the story of the Good Samaritan, as Jesus tells us, that when the people coming by, which were priests, who walked to the other side and ignored the man who was lying, for all practical purposes, looked as though he was dead on the side of the road. That's why they went on the other side and avoided him. And they would not show any compassion and help the man who was beaten badly and left for dead on the side of the road. Because the priests were more concerned about maintaining a certain religious purity than they were about caring for their fellow man. This is a great example of religion gone bad. And you know there is bad religion. There is bad and unhealthy religion, and it can be found in all world religions. Christianity is not immune. There are things that creep up in our faith tradition or in our practice that is unhealthy and bad. You know this to be true. Not everything about every religion is good. And certainly this is a great example of it. And so Jesus is approached by a leper. And the leper says, "If you will, you can make me clean." He didn't say, "If you will, you can make me healthy." He didn't say, "If you will, you could heal me." Because the most important thing for that leper, the most painful part of his lot in life, is being regarded as less than human. As being regarded as less than everyone else. It's being excluded from the community. "If you will, Jesus, you can make me clean." And Jesus does something that astonished everyone standing around him on that road that day. He did something that was unheard of. Never before seen. It was outrageous. It was radical. It went against all of the religious rules laid down by their ancestors through the prophet Moses. Jesus stretches forth his hand and he touches the unclean leper. Phil's not unclean, by the way. As far as I know. What was more shocking, the miracle that followed, the man was cured, or was it the fact that Jesus reached out and touched the untouchable? You see, my brothers and sisters, Jesus is in the business of reaching out and touching the untouchable. Those that we exclude, Jesus embraces. So you can be sure that those people that we exclude in our life are the very same people that Jesus will welcome into his kingdom with great joy. Now, I want to be on the right side of Jesus, don't you? It says something for how we're to treat people. St. Peter, in a vision that he received later in his life, learned something that he shared with his brother and sister who were followers of Jesus. And it was this: I have been taught that I am to call no one unclean. No one is unclean. No one is beyond the love and compassion of God. No one is to be excluded. This is the radical message that Jesus is giving to us. Sure, he healed. In his presence, the demonic flees like darkness flees in a room when the light is switched on. Disease couldn't last long in the presence of Jesus. Whatever the malady was, even leprosy that was incurable, is not something that would leave the presence, that could maintain an existence. It cannot coexist with the presence of the Son of God. The very presence of Jesus was so powerful with the kingdom and the reign of God within his own heart and life that disease and darkness and evil was dispelled immediately. The power of his rule, the power of his reign. And that same king wants to reign within our hearts. He puts to flight all injustice, all unfairness, all that is not of love. All evil, all unfairness, all disease, all maladies. He puts all of those things, even death itself, to flight. To be in the presence of Jesus is to be in the presence of the one who is able to convey to us the wonderful grace and power of God's love and compassion. So the religion of exclusivity is rejected by Jesus, and instead he proposes to us a religion of inclusivity. With Jesus, no one is ever marginalized. The one on the outside gets becomes a part of the inner circle of Jesus and is given a place at his table. This is the gospel that we preach. Who are the lepers of our time? Who are those people that we consider unclean, that we wish not to associate with? Who are the lepers in my life? Who are the lepers in modern society? Those that we would want to exclude for whatever reason. Those are the lepers of our own time. And the church is to open its doors and windows and welcome these very people that Jesus would embrace into their midst. We need to be like St. Francis of Assisi, who was a true disciple of Jesus, who really got it. Who, when he was walking down the road, encountered a leper, and remembering what Jesus did, St. Francis of Assisi ran forward and embraced that leper. He took a risk, but he got the understanding of the gospel of Jesus and what it's all about. My brothers and sisters, here at St. Matthew's, may we become an inclusive people. May we become a people that opens wide our arms and is willing to embrace the unloved, the unappreciated, those who are considered worthless by society standards. If we were to open our arms and open our doors and begin to embrace these people who have been marginalized by other religious institutions, our church will grow. Our church will grow. It's not merely something that we can do as the choir and the clergy, because we're not the church, we're just part of it. But it's something we do collectively with brothers and sisters. People will come here because you embrace them, because you welcome them, because you invite them. And maybe they too will find the comfort and the solace that you have found as we gather here together. And we're nothing but a bunch of marginalized people anyway, aren't we? You know, and we can come here because the incurable disease, whatever is haunting and whatever creates brokenness in our own lives, is made clean. Jesus is the only one who can make us clean. It is his will to make us clean, and we are made clean by the word that he has spoken to us. And that, my brothers and sisters, is the gospel of the Lord.
Amen.
Let us stand.